This is CNN Breaking News.
We're following breaking news on President Trump's scramble to ease growing fears of a recession. He just confirmed he's looking at a possible payroll tax cut hours after the White House denied that was under discussion. And he's once again picking on a favorite target, pressuring the Federal Reserve to cut interest rates. The president suggesting something needs to be done to boost the economy while insisting the U.S. is very far from a recession. Also breaking, the president takes his feud with a Democratic congresswoman who's been critical of Israel to a stunning new level. He says any Jewish voters who vote Democratic show either, quote, a total lack of knowledge or great disloyalty. I'll get reaction from Democratic Congressman Ted Deutsch. He is on the Foreign Affairs and the Judiciary Committees, and our correspondents and analysts also are standing by for us. First, the CNN chief White House correspondent Jim Acosta. And Jim, the president took these questions in the Oval Office about the economy, but a whole lot more as well.
That's right, Brianna. As you said, the president sounded open to the idea of a payroll tax cut while talking with reporters earlier today in the Oval Office. The president said that would not be necessary because of any kind of looming recession. Then the president once again went after Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib of Minnesota. And during the course of those remarks, the president said if Jewish people in the United States vote for Democrats, they are showing, quote, disloyalty. President Trump is ripping into forecasts from economists that the U.S. could be headed toward a recession.
I think the word recession is a word that's inappropriate because it's just a word that the certain people, I'm going to be kind, certain people in the media are trying to build up because they'd love to see a recession.
Still, the president revealed he's considering some proposals to boost the U.S. economy, including a payroll tax cut.
Payroll tax is something that we think about, and a lot of people would like to see that, and that very much affects the workers of our country, and we have a lot of workers. I've been thinking about payroll taxes for a long time. Whether or not we do it now or not is it's not being done because of recession.
But the president contradicted his own aides, who had just batted down the idea a few hours earlier in the day.
This economic expansion, it's not being considered at this time.
Mr. Trump is still touting the U.S. economy as the best in the world, but there are signs of possible trouble. U.S. Steel announced up to 200 temporary layoffs in the critical battleground state of Michigan. That news came less than a week after the president said the steel industry was humming along.
We're doing steel. Steel industry is hot. They were dumping steel all over. They were destroying our companies. U.S. Steel now, all of them, they're all expanding. The steel industry is back. It's doing great.
On gun control, the president also seemed to downplay the need for tighter background checks. Sources tell CNN the president has soured on the idea of new gun laws after talking with lawmakers in the NRA.
A lot of the people that put me where I am are strong believers in the Second Amendment, and I am also. And we have to be very careful about that. You know, they call it the slippery slope. And all of a sudden, everything gets taken away. We're not going to let that happen.
But listen to what the president said earlier this month when he claimed he didn't agree with the notion of a slippery slope, an NRA talking point.
NRA has, over the years, taken a very, very tough stance on everything, and I understand it. You know, it's a slippery slope. They think you approve one thing, and that leads to a lot of bad things. I don't agree with that.
The president also attacked Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, who gave a tearful rebuke of Israel's decision to ban the Michigan Democrat, along with Minnesota Representative Ilhan Omar, tweeting, "I don't buy Tlaib's tears. I have watched her violence, craziness, and most importantly, words for far too long. Now tears. She hates Israel and all Jewish people. She is an anti-Semite."
All of a sudden, she starts with tears. And I don't buy it. I don't buy it for a second.
Then the president expanded on his rant, making a remark immediately condemned by some Jewish American groups as offensive.
I think any Jewish people that vote for a Democrat, I think it shows either a total lack of knowledge or great disloyalty.
And just days away from the next G7 summit, the president resurrected his own talk of allowing Russia back in, after the group of world powers gave Moscow the boot over its annexation of Crimea.
Talking about Russia because I've gone to numerous G7 meetings, and I guess President Obama, because Putin outsmarted him, President Obama thought it wasn't a good thing to have Russia in, so he wanted Russia out. But I think it's much more appropriate to have Russia in.
And getting back to the president's comments about Michigan Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, a number of Jewish American groups have already weighed in condemning the president's remarks. Jonathan Greenblatt, the CEO of the Anti-Defamation League, has put out this tweet. We can show it, put it up on screen for you. It says it's unclear who POTUS is claiming Jews would be disloyal to, but charges of disloyalty have long been used to attack Jews. As we've said before, it's possible to engage in the democratic process. Without these claims, it's long overdue to stop using Jews as a political football. So, Brianna, a steady stream of condemnations of the president's remarks in the Oval Office coming in this evening after what he had to say about the Congresswoman. Brianna.
Jim Acosta, thank you so much. We're going to have more on the president's comments about Jewish voters. But first, President Trump says no global threat or crisis is keeping him up at night. This, even as his Secretary of State is acknowledging that ISIS is resurging and may be more powerful in some places than it was a few years ago. Let's go to the Pentagon and our Pentagon correspondent, Barbara Starr. Barbara, just months ago, President Trump declared that ISIS was defeated.
Well, that's right, Brianna. And tonight, President Trump is confronting the very cold, hard reality that under his administration, ISIS is far from gone. The bloody aftermath of an ISIS suicide bomber attack at a wedding in Kabul that killed 62 and injured nearly 200. It is the latest devastating show of ISIS resurgence, remaking itself to organize, finance, and carry out attacks where security forces are fragile. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo trying to explain the renewed ISIS threat.
It's complicated. There's certainly places where ISIS is more powerful today than they were 3 or 4 years ago. But the caliphate is gone, and their capacity to conduct external attacks has been made much more difficult. We've taken down significant risk. Not all of it, but a significant amount.
ISIS's lock on vast areas of Iraq and Syria is largely gone, often celebrated by President Trump.
And we have won against ISIS. We've beaten them, and we've beaten them badly. We've taken back the land.
But the Pentagon has always warned that a victory on land is not the defeat of ISIS ideology, which has spread to Afghanistan, North Africa, and across the Middle East. Today, there may be as many as 15,000 ISIS fighters and operatives inside Iraq and Syria with the financing and weapons to organize and conduct attacks.
It means that ISIS remains a viable terrorist network. They were never just a caliphate.
And another 70,000 displaced persons are at this camp in northeastern Syria, including nearly 50,000 under the age of 18. It's prime ISIS recruiting ground. President Trump finding it tough to meet the promise to bring troops home. James Mattis suddenly resigned as Secretary of Defense when Trump wanted a full withdrawal from Syria. In Iraq, 5,200 troops are still a backstop for Iraqi security forces. In Syria, there are just about 1,000 troops still conducting counterterrorism missions and supporting local Syrian fighters. And at least some 14,000 troops in Afghanistan may not be home by the 2020 election as the president hoped, given the terror threat.
We are bringing some of our troops back, but we have to have a presence.
Now, President Trump also recently said a number of al-Qaeda and ISIS leaders have been killed in combat missions in recent weeks, but so far, he's not saying who. Brianna?
Barbara Starr at the Pentagon, thank you. Joining me now is Congressman Ted Deutsch. He's a Democrat who serves on the Foreign Affairs Committee and the Judiciary Committee. Sir, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Brianna.
I want to begin with something the president said. I mean, this was just incendiary, what he said in the Oval Office today. He said, quote, "I think any Jewish people that vote for a Democrat, I think it shows either a total lack of knowledge or great disloyalty," end quote. What's your reaction?
It's outrageous, it's offensive, and it's dangerous. I don't know who the president is talking about. Is he suggesting we're being disloyal to him? Is he suggesting that he knows what it means to be loyal to my religion? The president needs to stop dividing people. He needs to stop doing this, using this kind of rhetoric. Brianna, I went to the House floor in March and I tried to explain to my colleagues what it means, what it has meant throughout the history of the Jewish people when charges of dual loyalty are leveled against Jews. Now, to find myself having to explain to the President of the United States what it means when someone suggests that the Jews are being disloyal and what that has meant to the Jewish community throughout history, it creates an environment that puts Jews at risk. The President should know that. It is outrageous. I condemn it. And frankly, everyone who cares about our democracy ought to condemn the President's words today as well.
How do you square that? I mean, you have been critical of your colleagues. You have been critical of Democratic Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib. You've been critical when your colleagues have trafficked, they've said inadvertently and apologized for it, in anti-Semitic tropes. That's on one side. And now you have the president saying this as he's also trying to make, for instance, Rashida Tlaib the face of the Democratic Party.
Well, you're right. I've been very clear, and I think it's imperative that we all be clear that anti-Semitism should be condemned wherever it comes from, and the kind of language that contributes to anti-Semitism should be condemned wherever it comes from. That's why I spoke out against language that plays into classic anti-Semitic tropes, lies about the Jewish community. I did that on the House floor about one of my colleagues. And that's why I would expect Democrats and Republicans alike would condemn the President of the United States for using language that throughout history has led to very bad outcomes for Jewish communities around the world. The charge that somehow Jews are being disloyal to their government, that they're not really good Jews. Brianna, I had a meeting with a group of veterans just yesterday, and many of them are Jews, and many of them voted for me. The fact is that just like my father who served our country, just like these brave veterans that I was with yesterday, when they vote for Democrats because that's who they believe in, that's what they want, that's how they choose to exercise their right to vote, when that's what they do and the president calls them out and suggests that they're disloyal Americans, how dare he?
Is he being anti-Semitic, saying what he said?
Well, what the president is doing is creating an environment in which anti-Semitism can flourish. When you start to use language like that, when you suggest that Jews are being disloyal to America or to him or whatever it is he meant, there's no valid reason to say that. But when you start using language like that, then the white nationalists hear it, and it sends them a signal that it's okay for them to use language that Jews are disloyal. That's what he does. And to do that when we're not that far removed from the deadliest attack on the Jewish community in American history, which happened in Pittsburgh, when a shooter went in, and it was a white nationalist shooter who went to that synagogue the week after they had a Sabbath service that was focused on immigrants and refugees. That's why he chose to attack Jews. And then you look at language that plays right into the hands of white nationalists. I've said it before, and I'm sorry to be so emotional about this, Brianna, but it needs to be condemned. The president needs to apologize to the Jewish community. He needs to apologize to everyone who is committed to a vibrant democracy with differences of opinion. Just because more than 3/4 of the Jewish community chose not to vote for President Trump is not reason for him to use the kind of language that winds up fueling the anger of white nationalists.
Congressman, thank you so much for joining us. Congressman Ted Deutsch.
Thanks, Brianna. I appreciate it.
Just ahead, we have more on President Trump trying to use Jewish support for Israel as a political weapon against Democrats, but will it backfire? And the feds... We're following breaking news, including President Trump's stunning statement that any Jewish people who vote for a Democrat show, quote, either a total lack of knowledge or great disloyalty. I want to dig deeper in this with our correspondents and our analysts. And the reason this is so problematic is because this is an anti-Semitic trope. And we've heard about it before because a Democrat, Rashida Tlaib, waltzed into this trope herself, this idea of dual loyalty, and she was smacked down for it earlier this year. This is something the president should be very aware of, Jeffrey, and yet it seems to be this unconscious kind of thing that just is coming out of his mouth, and it's unbelievable.
Yeah, one of the problems with having public officials like the president who doesn't read books, who doesn't know any history, is that they don't realize some of the things they say, even if it's unconscious, plays into anti-Semitic or other sort of bigoted stereotypes. The idea that Jews owe loyalty to Israel versus the United States, that they are not loyal Americans. That's an old and venerable anti-Semitic stereotype that statements like this play into. It's also just incredible arrogance when you consider that 70% of Jews voted for Hillary Clinton in 2016. Are they all stupid? Are they all ignorant? I mean, the fact is, I think, Jews can make up their mind like any other ethnic group about how to vote without, having their loyalty or their intelligence questioned by the president.
Well, and he's also being criticized by people on both sides of the aisle for this comment, not just the president's usual critics who don't like things that he say or say he oversteps the line, but people who are on his side are saying by making this comment, he doesn't realize why they have been critical of people like Rashida Tlaib, like Ilhan Omar for their comments in the past. So they're saying it essentially works against the president in his argument, as today he was calling Rashida Tlaib on Twitter an anti-Semite after he watched that press conference, which is what led to him making this comment, criticizing her for crying, talking about going to visit her, not going to visit her grandmother.
And there could be criticism of him in the same vein, and he doesn't seem to realize that. I mean, what was your reaction when you heard this?
Well, I think it reinforces for many that when the president complains of anti-Semitism, in particular as part of the sustained attack that he's had on Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, and other members of the so-called squad, he's really just doing it for political gain. He's not actually taking seriously the issue of anti-Semitism. Certainly, we've talked about, and in the wake of the El Paso shooting, we were discussing the administration's lack of attention to the rise of white nationalists and the increasing threat that is posed by potential domestic terrorists who have white supremacist views. It goes back to Charlottesville when he equivocated between neo-Nazis who were marching in Charlottesville and counter-protesters from the left. And so what he's trying to do is create an opening with Jewish voters. To Jeffrey's point, they have overwhelmingly favored Democratic presidential candidates over the last couple of decades. But in doing so, he's really just throwing this around as more of a political talking point rather than making any genuine appeal to the Jewish community in America.
David Swerdlick, is it going to work, or do you see where this backfires?
No, I think it's backfiring already, and I agree with everything that's already been said. And let me just add a couple points to it, Bree. One, yes, anti-Semitic comments should be condemned no matter what side of the aisle they come from. Congresswoman Omar has made some statements that trafficked in anti-Semitism. She was rightly criticized. She rightly walked some of those back. President Trump, this isn't the first time that he's dipped a toe into those waters. 2015, the Republican Jewish Coalition, he was giving a speech and said, "I'm a negotiator like you," another anti-Semitic trope. There have been a couple of other instances like that I can't quote verbatim for you right now. There was one rally where he talked about the pernicious influence of cosmopolitans, which is also, towing on the line of anti-Semitism. But there's also a bigger hypocrisy in the conservative movement here. Whenever you have a debate, and this debate has been going on throughout the last decade, throughout the Obama era, saying that many African-American conservatives, for instance, say that black people who vote overwhelmingly for Democrats are on the Democratic plantation. This is like the president saying that those 7 out of 10 Jewish voters are on the Democratic Party plantation. And where is the outcry from conservatives? Where's Kanye West? Where's Candace Owens? Where's Star Parker? Where are all these people calling out the president?
I wonder too, Caitlin, and you cover this White House day in, day out. Just to broaden this out to this idea of such divisive language, we just saw 2 mass shootings, one of which targeted Hispanics. That was the whole point of the shooter in El Paso. And it made a lot of observers say, is the president going to cool it with his rhetoric, which is aligned with some of the rhetoric that we saw of the shooter? there was this question of, do the words that he says, do they have consequences? And to this point, even talking about playing into anti-Semitic tropes, I mean, what has he learned?
Well, I don't think the president thinks his rhetoric is responsible for the shooting in El Paso, nor did it contribute. They have been on the defense inside the White House about that ever since he was first being compared to the manifesto that alleged suspect wrote. The question of whether or not it changes the president's tune depends typically on who his audience is. You saw that after the send her back chants happened at the rally that I was attending, where the president was, where he did pause, he did let the crowd chant that. But then when reporters confronted the president about it, he denied the events that had actually occurred. So the president is really receptive to whichever audience he's in front of, whether it's reporters, whether it's his supporters at a rally. So that typically is what changes his tune. It's not typically because he realizes he said something he shouldn't have said.
The president is also particularly fixated on the issue of loyalty. You know, he talks about it all the time, always in the context of loyalty to him. You know, black people should be loyal because African-American unemployment is low. Remember the famous conversations with James Comey, which are part of the basis of the obstruction of justice accusations against the president. You know, I want loyalty. I need loyalty. I mean, but it's not about loyalty to country. It's not about loyalty to the rule of law. It's about loyalty to him personally.
All right, you guys, stand by. We have a whole lot more to talk about ahead.